The arena smelled like iron, sweat, and wet stone. Kale tasted it the moment he stepped onto the judge's platform, an old, familiar tang that clung to the back of the throat the way fear did. The pit below was carved into the mountain like a wound, torches hissed in their brackets. Chains rattled whenever the crowd surged forward for a better look, and the crowd was surging now because the giant orc had arrived. She ducked under the archway, shoulders scraping carved runes that had stood untouched for centuries. Her skin was a deep forest green marked with pale scars like lightning strikes. A braid as thick as a man's arm swung behind her. When she stood fully upright in the pit, the murmuring died into stunned silence like a wave collapsing into foam. Gorza Ironmaw, someone whispered, as if speaking her name too loudly might summon a curse. Kale's fingers tightened around the staff of office, a darkwood rod capped with an iron ring that declared him judge of combat. He'd been called many titles across many lands. Soldier, exile, oathbreaker, saint once by a village that didn't know his real name, but here in the pit of Stoneshade he was simply the man who decided who walked away. His eyes swept the fighters waiting at the edge of the pit, 6 of them. The House of Coins had arranged a spectacle, champions from human cities, mercenaries from the borderlands, a few bold orcs eager to test themselves. The champion bracket was meant to end with Gorza crushing whoever survived long enough to face her. The crowd wanted blood and the House of Coins wanted the wagers. Kale wanted something else. He wanted the truth. A bell rang low and heavy. A thin man in crimson robe, scribe veil, leaned close, ink-stained hands clasped. "Judge Kale," he murmured, "the rules have been posted. No killing strikes unless a fighter yields. No magic above the 3rd tier. No external weapons beyond what is declared." Kale nodded without looking at him. His attention was on Gorza. She stood in the pit with the calm of a boulder, not restless, not boastful, not hungry for cheers. She merely waited, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the judge's platform as if she'd already decided the only person worth measuring was him. When her gaze met Kale's, something sparked across the distance, recognition without familiarity. A predator noticing another predator. A horn sounded. The first bouts began. Steel clanged. Bodies hit stone, the crowd roared, jeered, laughed when a man was tossed like a sack of grain. Kale watched each strike, each stumble, listening to the rhythm of violence the way a musician listens to a song. The pit always told you who someone was, not when they won but how. A human sellsword fought with desperation and pride, bad combination. He overextended, got clipped, hit the ground hard. Kale raised his staff. "Yield," the sellsword spat blood and nodded. The bout ended. An orc youth fought with fury, but his stance was sloppy. He chased the kill, forgot the win. A mercenary hooked his leg, sent him down. The youth tried to stand, teeth bared, but his knee buckled. Kale lifted his staff. "Yield," the youth hesitated, then slammed his fist to the stone. "Yield," he snarled. Kale ended it. Piece by piece, the bracket collapsed toward its intended conclusion. The House of Coins had done their work well. The crowd was fed enough blood to stay hungry. Then it was time for the giant orc. Her first opponent was a mountain of a man in chainmail and bare fur, a fighter who'd built a reputation by breaking ribs with his bare hands. He strutted into the pit, basking in the cheers, and pointed at Gorza with a grin. "Orc," he shouted, "I'll take your tusks as trophies." Gorza didn't answer. The bell rang, he charged. Gorza moved like a door closing. One step, one pivot, one massive hand catching his wrist mid-swing. The crowd gasped when she twisted, just slightly, and the man dropped to his knees with a scream that made the torches seem to flare brighter. She didn't break him, she simply took his strength away. Then she leaned down close enough for him to hear something only he would ever know, and he went pale. He slapped the stone, frantic. "Yield," he howled. "I yield." Kale's brow furrowed. He ended it immediately. The man crawled away like his shadow was chasing him. Gorza didn't look at the crowd. She looked at Kale again, expression unreadable. The next opponent lasted longer. A nimble spearwoman danced and cut, drawing thin lines of blood across Gorza's forearms. The crowd cheered. The House of Coins cheered loudest, hoping to inflate wagers. Then Gorza caught the spear shaft between 2 fingers, yanked, and sent the spearwoman flying. Not a cruel throw, measured, like placing a coin down. The spearwoman hit the stone, stunned. She stared up at the giant orc's looming figure and yielded with a shaky breath. Kale ended it. Now it was obvious. Gorza wasn't just strong, she was precise. The bracket emptied until only one name remained to face her. A lanky warrior with a shaved head and a hooked blade, the house's favored human champion, a man named Rusk who fought like a rat, fast, clever, and cruel. He bowed exaggeratedly to Kale's platform and winked at the crowd. Then he rolled his shoulders and stepped into the pit. Gorza cracked her neck once. The bell rang. Rusk didn't charge. He circled. He tested with feints, flicks of the blade. Gorza waited, weight balanced, hands open. She didn't chase. She watched. The crowd began to shout impatiently. Rusk darted in, slash, back out. Another slash. A cut opened along Gorza's shoulder, blood dark against green skin. Rusk grinned. That's it. Bleed for me, big. Gorza moved. Not fast like a human, fast like gravity. She stepped forward at the exact moment Rusk committed, and his hooked blade caught nothing but air. Her fist struck his ribs with a sound like wood splitting. Rusk's feet lifted off the ground. He hit the stone and didn't get up. Silence dropped over the arena. Kale rose slightly from his chair, staff in hand. He could see Rusk's chest, shallow movement, alive but barely. Gorza stood over him, breathing steady. Yield, Kale called. Rusk's eyes rolled, trying to focus. His lips trembled as if forming a curse. Gorza's hand closed around the back of his collar. She hauled him up enough that his eyes met hers, and then she spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Say it, Rusk choked. WH what? The words, Gorza said, voice like a grinding stone. The wager you offered me in the back halls. The crowd erupted into confused shouts. Rusk's face went gray. He tried to twist away, but her grip was iron. Kale felt the shift. This wasn't sport anymore. Rusk spat, voice hoarse. If I lose, you're mine, the crowd roared, delighted and scandalized all at once. Gorza's eyes narrowed. Louder. Rusk's throat bobbed. He looked toward the House of Coins balcony where shadowed figures sat behind silk curtains. Then he whispered, if I lose, I'll be yours. Gorza let him drop like refuse. She turned, lifted both arms slightly, and addressed the pit as if she were speaking to the stones themselves. You heard him, she said. He made a claim on me like property, like meat, like a thing to be won. The crowd's roar faltered, uncertain. Gorza pointed at the balcony. That claim was encouraged. Torches sputtered. The air changed. Scribe Vale leaned close to Kale again, panic sharp in his whisper. Judge, this isn't she's disrupting. Kale didn't answer. His eyes were on the balcony now, on the silk curtains, on the faint movement behind them. He'd come here for a reason. The House of Coins didn't just run games. They ran markets, they ran debts, they ran people. Kale had spent years hunting rumors across border towns, orc women vanishing, human refugees disappearing, fighters who lost and were never seen again, always the same trail, coins, contracts, and the pit, and now the giant orc had dragged the rot into the light. Gorza looked back at Kale. Judge, she called, voice steady. The bracket is done, I am the victor. Kale lifted the staff slightly. You are. But victory is not why I came, she said. I came for a verdict. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some laughed, thinking it theater. Others leaned in, sensing something sharper. Gorza raised her chin. I was sold once, not by my clan, by deadmen wearing the house's seal. They dragged me from the river road in chains. I fought. I broke 3 men's teeth. It didn't matter. Her hand touched the pale scar across her collarbone. They said I was too dangerous to keep, so they made me fight for my freedom, again and again. They told me if I won enough, my chain would be forgiven. She spat to the stone. They never meant to forgive it. The crowd went quiet in a way that felt heavy, the kind of quiet that made men suddenly aware of their own hands. Gorza's gaze didn't waver. I earned my release by force. I tore my chain from the wall and walked out, but there were others, smaller, weaker, quiet ones who didn't survive the pit. She pointed down at Rusk, who was still twitching, trying to crawl away. Now their champion thinks he can own me with a joke, with a wager, her voice sharpened. I want the house condemned. I want the contracts burned. I want the names. Scribe Vale hissed. Judge Kale, you cannot allow. Kale stood. The platform creaked under the shift of his weight. He was not tall like the orc, not imposing by size. But when he rose, the air seemed to straighten. He walked to the edge of the platform, staff tapping stone. The crowd watched him with the restless hunger of animals. Combat judge, someone shouted. Declare her prize. Give her the coin. Make her fight the next. Kale raised the staff, and the iron ring at its top caught the torchlight. The sound that followed was not a shout, it was a resonance. A low, trembling hum that rolled outward like thunder trapped in metal. The crowd stilled as if an invisible hand pressed down on their shoulders. Scribe Vale froze mid-breath. Gorza's eyes widened not in fear but in startled recognition. The staff wasn't just a symbol. It was a seal, and Kale had just awakened it. He spoke, and his voice carried without strain. The pit of Stoneshade operates under the Old Accord. A few elders in the crowd flinched at the words. The Old Accord was the ancient law that governed border arenas, older than the House of Coins, older than the towns that had grown around the pit. Most thought it ceremonial now. Kale continued, each word striking like a hammer. Under the accord, the judge's platform is sovereign. No house, no clan, no crown may overrule a lawful verdict within the pit. A ripple of unease spread through the balconies. Kale lifted the staff higher. The hum deepened. Torch flames wavered toward it as if drawn. You have presented a claim, Kale said, looking directly at Gorza. And you have presented evidence, a public vow made as property and the house's influence over it. He turned his gaze toward the silk-curtained balcony. House of Coins, step forward. Silence. The crowd began to murmur again, more nervous now. Kale's eyes narrowed. Step forward, he repeated, and the hum became a pressure in the bones. The curtains shifted. A man emerged, thin-jeweled, smiling too wide. He raised his hands as if calming children. Honored judge, he called down. Surely this is drama. The victor is due her coin and title. Let us not stain sport with politics. Kale's stare didn't change. Name yourself. The man hesitated, then bowed. Marrow Kint, steward of the house. Kale pointed the staff at him. Under the old accord, any house accused within the pit must submit to the truth right. The steward's smile twitched. We don't, judge, that right is ancient, Kale agreed, and binding. Scribe Vale grabbed Kale's sleeve, trembling. My lord, the truth right requires blood. Kale didn't look at him. Yes, he looked back at Marrow Kint. Submit or I declare the house in contempt of accord. Marrow's eyes flicked to the crowd, to the guards, to the exits. He tried to laugh. You think you can threaten a house with old words? Kale lifted the staff higher. The iron ring flared not with fire but with pale light like moonlit steel. It cast a circle over the pit, and as it widened, the crowd's voices strangled into silence again. The guards near the balcony stiffened, hands hovering near weapons, and then stopped as if their bodies refused to obey. Gorza exhaled sharply. You really are, she began, then trailed off. Kale spoke quietly, but everyone heard. I don't threaten. I rule, Marrow's bravado cracked. What are you? Kale's jaw tightened. A memory flickered snow, a ruined hall, a crown shattered on stone, a dying king grasping Kale's wrist and pressing a seal into his hand. A promise made in blood, a promise that had hunted him across years. I am the last sworn arbiter of the old accord, Kale said, and I have been listening to your house for a long time. The pit shook not physically but in spirit. You could feel the crowd realize they were not watching a show. They were witnessing judgment. Marrow's voice rose desperate. This is madness. The accord died with the old borders. Kale's gaze swept the balconies. Did it, or did you simply find it convenient to pretend? He looked at the pit floor, at Rusk curled and shaking, at the blood on the stones. Then he lifted his free hand, palm open. The air snapped. A thin line of light, no thicker than a thread, dropped from the iron ring to the pit, touching the stone like a needle-finding cloth. The crowd gasped as the line spread into a web of faint, shimmering patterns across the arena floor, runes hidden in the stone, awakened by the staff. They pulsed softly like a heartbeat. Gorza stared down, astonished. The pit, it's a seal. It always was, Kale said, a court disguised as entertainment. Marrow stepped back, face pale. No, 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 Kale's voice sharpened. Marrow Kint, by the authority of the old accord, I invoke the truth right. Speak now. Has your house trafficked fighters through debt and contract? Has it enslaved those who could not pay? Has it arranged bouts meant to kill, not to test? Marrow shook his head violently. No, the runes on the stone flared. A sound like a bell cracked in the air. Marrow staggered as if struck, clutching his chest. His mouth opened and his own voice betrayed him. Yes, he rasped. A howl surged from the crowd, rage, shock, disbelief. Marrow's eyes widened with horror. No, I didn't. Kale didn't relent. Have you purchased orc women through false debts? Marrow's jaw clenched, his lips trembled, the runes pulsed. Yes, his voice said, hollow and forced. Gorza's fists clenched so hard her knuckles turned lighter green. Kale's gaze was cold. Have you killed those who tried to leave? Marrow began to sob, shaking his head, but the truth right was merciless. Yes, his voice admitted. The crowd broke into chaos. People shouted. Some tried to rush the balcony, only to find their legs refuse to cross the rune-marked boundary. Guards shouted orders they couldn't carry out. The house's men looked like insects pinned under glass. Gorza stared at Kale as if seeing a legend step out of fire. You could have done this at any time, she said, voice low. Kale's eyes didn't leave Marrow. Not safely. The house is a hydra. Cut one head in private, another grows in shadow. He lifted the staff again. But in public, under witness, the accord becomes binding to all who watched. Gorza understood. Her expression shifted, respect edged with something sharper. You needed the pit full, she murmured. You needed them to hear the truth. Kale's jaw tightened. And I needed someone brave enough to drag the rot into the center. He looked at her then. That was you. Gorza's surprise was visible now, genuine, unsettling. She'd come expecting brutality, maybe indifference, not a judge who listened. Marrow collapsed to his knees, weeping. Please, Judge, I'm just a steward. There are others higher. Kale's voice cut through him. Name them. The steward's throat worked. His eyes darted toward the curtained shadows, toward the higher seats. The runes waited. He choked out names. One by one, merchants, magistrates, even a minor lord from a nearby human city. Each name landed like a stone dropped into a pond, ripples of outrage spreading through the crowd. When he finished, Kale lowered the staff slightly. The hum softened but didn't vanish. He turned to Gorza. You wanted a verdict, he said. Gorza's breath was slow. Her eyes glistened with something she refused to let fall. Yes, Kale nodded once. Then hear it. He raised the staff and struck it against the stone platform. The sound rang through the pit like a ceremonial drum. By the old accord, I declare the House of Coins guilty of bondage by deceit, unlawful killing under false sport, and violation of sovereign combat law. Their contracts are void, their holdings within the pit are forfeit, their stewards are seized in witness. He looked out over the crowd, letting the words sink in, and any fighter held by their debt, human, orc, or otherwise, is free. For a heartbeat the world held its breath, then the pit erupted, not with the roar of bloodlust but with something rarer, relief, fury, vindication, fear. Gorza closed her eyes as if the words struck somewhere deep. When she opened them again, she was staring at Kale like he'd changed the shape of the world. But the moment didn't last, because the House of Coins didn't build its empire on surrender. A shrill whistle cut through the noise. From the far tunnels, hidden gates slammed open. Armored men poured into the pit, not guards of the arena, but private enforcers in black lacquered plates. Their helms were smooth, faceless. Crossbows glittered in torchlight. The crowd screamed. People shoved, trying to flee, only to find the exits clogged. Scribe Vale stumbled backward on the platform, voice cracking. Judge, Gorza's head snapped toward the incoming force. Her body shifted, ready. Kale's eyes narrowed. The enforcers formed a semicircle around the pit floor, aiming upward, not at Gorza, but at the judge's platform. Their leader stepped forward, helm under one arm, revealing a scarred face and calm eyes. Arbiter, he called, voice carrying. You shouldn't have come back. Kale's grip tightened on the staff. Brannock. The name tasted like old betrayal. Brannock smiled faintly. Still remember me, that's flattering. You were sworn, Kale said, voice hard. You broke oath. I adapted, Brannock replied. Oaths don't feed men, coins do. He raised a hand. Crossbows clicked into firing tension. Gorza's voice thundered from below. Cowards, face the victor. Brannock didn't look at her. His gaze stayed on Kale. Step down from the platform, Arbiter, hand over the seal. And perhaps I'll let the crowd walk out alive. The threat landed like a blade in the ribs. Kale could feel the crowd's fear surge. Panic was a wildfire waiting for a spark. Scribe Vale whispered, we should. Kale didn't answer. He didn't negotiate with oath breakers. Instead, he did something the house had never expected. He smiled, not kindly, not warmly, like a man who had been cornered before and had learned to become the sharpest thing in the room. You think the seal is an object, Kale said softly. Brannock frowned. It's in your hand. Kale lifted the staff. No, it's in the pit. He struck the platform again. The runes on the pit floor flared brighter and the light web snapped upward like a net being thrown. It crawled up the walls, across the arches, over the balcony railings, wrapping the entire arena in a lattice of pale force. The enforcers' boots froze mid-step. Crossbows trembled as if the weapons refused to obey their owners. Brannock's eyes widened. What? Kale's voice carried, calm and absolute. Under the old accord, violence against the judge's platform is treason to sovereign law. The pit itself will not permit it. Brannock strained, muscles bulging, trying to force his arm to lift. It didn't. Sweat beaded on his brow. Kale stepped to the edge of the platform and looked down at Gorza. Gorza Ironmaw, he called. She looked up instantly, blood streaking her shoulder like a war banner. Do you still want a verdict? Kale asked. Gorza's throat worked. Yes. Then I offer you a choice, Kale said, voice ringing clear. The house will fall tonight, but it will not fall clean. There will be retaliation. They will hunt the freed. They will try to rebuild elsewhere. He lifted his free hand and pointed toward Brannock and his frozen line of enforcers. Help me end it here in the open with witness so the borders remember the accord. Gorza stared for a long second. Then she bared her tusks in a grin that was half fury, half joy. I came for a fight, she said, but I'll take a war. She stepped forward and planted a foot on the rune-lit stone. The light did not resist her, it welcomed her as if the pit recognized a righteous blade. Kale felt it, something ancient shifting, responding not just to his seal but to her will. The runes pulsed warmer. Brannick's voice turned sharp. No, she can't, she's not. Gorza cracked her knuckles. Not what? She looked up at Kale, and for the first time her expression softened only a fraction. You're the judge, she said. What am I? Kale met her gaze. A witness, he said, and then after a breath, and an executioner if you choose to be. The crowd went still again, watching, waiting. Because the giant orc had made a vow earlier, half joke, half insult, shouted by a cruel man, if I lose, I'll be yours. Now the words meant something else entirely. Gorza turned toward Brannick, towering and steady. I don't belong to anyone, she said, then she glanced up at Kale. But I will stand with you. Kale nodded once, accepting it like an oath. He raised the staff. By the old accord, he declared, voice rolling like storm wind, I offer trial by combat to those who reject this verdict. Brannick the Oathbreaker, do you contest? Brannick's eyes burned. His body strained against the rune's restraint. He forced the words out through clenched teeth. Yes. The moment he spoke, the runes around him shifted, loosening only around his feet, forming a circle of combat law. Kale's mouth tightened. Then step into the pit, alone. Brannick's men tried to move with him. The lattice tightened, snapping them back like dogs on chains. Brannick swallowed, then stepped forward, each movement heavy as if the air itself fought him. He descended into the pit, boots striking stone. Gorza waited for him, fists raised. The crowd's fear twisted into anticipation. Kale leaned forward slightly, staff held high. This bout, he announced, is not for coin, not for sport, not for ownership. He looked at Brannick. It is for the right to keep breathing under law. The bell rang. Brannick moved first, fast despite the runes. He drew a short sword from his belt, blade flashing. Gorza didn't have a weapon. She didn't need one. He slashed at her thigh. She pivoted, the blade cutting only cloth. He tried again, aiming for her ribs. She caught his wrist mid-swing and squeezed. Brannick grimaced, yanked free, and drove a knee toward her stomach. Gorza took it like it was rain, then head-butted him. The sound echoed. Brannick stumbled back, blood spraying from his nose. His eyes were wild now, not calm mercenary confidence, but the panic of a man realizing he'd stepped into a fight he couldn't buy his way out of. He feinted left, then threw a small dart, black, shimmering. Kale's eyes narrowed. Poison, forbidden. The dart struck Gorza's shoulder. She flinched just once. Brannick smiled, breathing hard. Even giants fall. Gorza's eyes went unfocused for a heartbeat. Kale felt the pit react, runes flickering in anger. He lifted the staff. You used poison, he said, voice turning cold. Brannick shrugged, voice unsteady. You said no magic above third tier. Poison isn't magic. Kale's gaze sharpened. It is unlawful. The runes flared and Brannick's legs buckled, forced to one knee. Gorza shook her head as if clearing fog, then looked down at the dart stuck in her shoulder. Slowly she reached up, snapped it off, and let the broken piece fall. Then she smiled. It was not a friendly expression. My clan eats poison mushrooms for sport, she said softly. You think a needle scares me? Brannick tried to stand. The runes resisted, letting him rise only slowly, as if giving him just enough rope to hang himself. Gorza advanced. She didn't rush. She hunted. Brannick swung wildly, trying to keep her back. She let the blade bite into her forearm, then grabbed the sword itself, ignoring the cut, and yanked. Brannick lost the weapon. Gorza drove her fist into his chest. He flew backward, slammed into stone, and slid down, coughing blood. He tried to crawl away. Gorza planted a boot beside his head, pinning him like a nail. She looked up at Kale. Judge, she called, voice steady despite the blood and poison. He yields. Brannick's eyes rolled. His mouth opened, but pride fought his lungs. Kale's gaze was hard. Brannick, he called, yield. Brannick's jaw trembled, then finally his palm slapped the stone. I yield, he croaked. Kale lifted the staff and the bell rang once final. The runes around Brannick tightened, binding him like invisible chains. A sound rose from the crowd, cheers, sobs, furious shouts. People who'd bet on blood now cried for justice without understanding why their throats ached with it. Gorza stepped back, breathing hard. The poison made her vision swim, but she stood like a mountain refusing to fall. Kale descended the steps from the platform, each footfall calm. When he reached the pit floor, he stood before her. Up close, Gorza was immense. She could have lifted him with one hand and tossed him like a child, but her eyes were on his staff, on the seal, on the old power humming in the stone, and on the strange fact that this human did not flinch. You planned this, she said quietly. I planned for a chance, Kale replied. Not for certainty. Gorza snorted, then winced as the poison tugged at her nerves. And I walked in like a fool, thinking I'd smash a few humans and walk away with coin. You walked in like someone who refuses to be owned, Kale said, her gaze sharpened. That champion's words, she murmured. I said nothing, I let him speak. I wanted everyone to hear what men like him think, Kale nodded. And you gave me the moment to invoke witness. For a heartbeat they stood amid the rune glow and the roaring crowd, two warriors from different worlds tethered by the same truth. Law without courage was just ink, and courage without law was just violence. Gorza's lips parted slightly as if she were about to say something, and then her knees dipped. Kale stepped forward instantly, catching her forearm. She stared down at his hand on her skin, shocked not at the touch but at the lack of fear in it. Don't, she growled, pride flaring. I won't, you don't have to fall to prove you fought, Kale said. Her eyes narrowed, then softened again just a fraction. Kale turned to the crowd, staff raised. By witness of the pit, he declared, the House of Coins is stripped of right, their enforcers are bound, their steward is condemned. He looked up to the balconies where other names had been spoken, where faces now hid behind hands and veils. And those who profit from chains will answer next. The rune lattice brightened once more. Somewhere in the crowd, an elder shouted, voice trembling with old faith. The accord lives. Others took it up, hesitant at first, then louder. The accord lives. The accord lives. The chant rolled through the arena like a rising tide. Gorza leaned closer to Kale, voice low. You think this ends tonight? Kale's eyes were tired. No, she huffed a laugh, then grimaced at the poison's sting. Good. Kale glanced at her, surprised. Gorza's gaze burned with something fierce and alive. Because I didn't come here only for myself, she said. I came for the ones who never made it out. Kale nodded once. Then we finish it. Gorza blinked, then gave him a look that was half disbelief, half dawning respect. Kale's grip tightened, steadying her. The house will try to make you disappear. They will call you a monster. They will call me a liar. They will offer coin to anyone who puts an arrow in our backs. He met her eyes. But tonight the pit heard the truth. And I'd rather die standing beside someone who understands what freedom costs than live under a market's silence. For a long moment, Gorza stared at him. Then she did something that made the crowd gasp louder than any punch. She lowered her head just slightly, not a bow of submission, a nod of shared oath. Fine human judge, she rumbled. You want a witness? Her tusks flashed in a grim smile. You've got one. Behind them, Brannick struggled against the runes, face twisted with hate. You think you've won? He spat. The house isn't just here, it's everywhere. Kale looked over his shoulder, calm as stone. Then everywhere will remember what happened in this pit. He turned back to Gorza. Can you walk? Gorza straightened, rolling her shoulders despite the poison. I can walk. She glanced down at Kale's staff. Can you still judge? Kale lifted it, the iron ring humming softly. I can. Gorza's eyes narrowed with something like amusement. Then judge this. She reached down, grabbed Marrow Kint by the collar and dragged him forward like a sack of coin. Marrow squealed. Please, mercy. Gorza looked at Kale. What does the accord say about those who buy lives? Kale's gaze was cold. Forfeit. Gorza nodded once, satisfied. Then she shoved Marrow into the rune circle at the center of the pit, where the light clung to him like a second skin. The crowd's chant rose again, hungry for justice now, not blood. Kale raised his staff and spoke the next verdict, his voice carrying through stone and flame. And as the rune lattice held the corrupt in place, the giant orc and the powerful human judge stood shoulder to shoulder, no longer spectacle, no longer prize and owner, but something the House of Coins feared more than any blade, a law with teeth, a freedom that refused to be bought, and a vow made in the pit that would ripple far beyond its walls.